Hello my friends, it's your brother Hampton from Hybrid Calisthenics. It's a little bit dark and rainy today, so I've changed locations and the rain might be too loud, so we'll have to see. I might have to refilm this. But I want to do a quick discussion on attracting like-minded people into our lives. So one of the ironies of living in the modern day is that in the digital age, we are more connected in some ways through social media and the internet and just being able to see what's going on and hear what's going on from thousands of miles away. We're very connected, but as a result, almost consequentially, some people feel less connected with their fellow person, right? And there's this kind of drifting apart where people feel isolated because people aren't engaging as much in person or other reasons that might be associated with that. So it's interesting. So we want to attract, I feel like some people want some more like-minded people associated, aligned with their values and their goals, as friends, acquaintances, and possibly lovers. And in fact, this video actually started off when I started conceptualizing it as a video on how to get a girlfriend, which is still a question that I've talked about before, but a question I still get asked a lot for more and more, so I might make a separate video on that. But I realized as I was drafting my ideas on that, speaking as a married person, that these things can apply platonically to friends, business associates, and acquaintances. So there's essentially two sides to this, and I've talked about it before, and I was going to kind of rush through it, but I'll spend more time on it because I feel like these points are really important and I can summarize them in different ways. And they're very important to the idea of attracting like-minded people. Like-minded, again, just to add, in the sense that we are aligned, but not necessarily have the same thoughts, in case anyone's thinking that. Some people don't only want like-minded people because they don't want to be in an echo chamber, which is a very valid thing. But you can be like-minded in your values, but differ on your interpretation on how to best express those values, for example. So that's why some people have different religions. Some can marry and be friends, and so on and so forth. But the two parts I usually recommend to people, whether for dating or for making friends or just growing in life, is for one part, I recommend we develop ourselves and try to grow and improve and find things that are true to us over time. And this is a process that takes years and decades, and I really don't think we ever really stop growing. So like even some very stubborn people, we still grow and change. As we grow and change, our beliefs will change subtly. Our values might stay very similar or the same, but our opinions change over time, and this isn't really a flaw, it's really a feature as we adapt and we learn more, as we can change our mind as we learn things, and we can try to improve ourselves. So again, there's another thing that people say sometimes that, well, you're just perfect just the way you are, you don't need to change, right? And there's like different intensities in which people believe that, but I can't speak as usual to whether or not you're perfect. You might be perfect, but I am not perfect, right? I will try to improve myself because there are things that I want to grow, and it's not necessarily for other people, but as I'll show in a metaphor in a bit, it's part of it is for myself, because even just acting true to myself, that is a journey in itself. It's like, well, do I actually want this? Right? So like we can see this, like, well, you want to be true to yourself. Okay, well, what would you say at this keynote or this speech that you're giving? What college do you want to go to? Where do you want to work? Right? And we change this over time, and there's like, and even though we are ourselves, and we want to be true to ourselves, we recognize that discovering that path takes some time. So the first part of what I'm discussing, of attracting like-minded people of any kind, is to keep working on ourselves so we actually attract people that are like-minded, because that like-minded sense is actually a little bit more complex than we might initially realize, because it takes some digging. It takes a path and a journey for us to actually get to the idea of what makes us us. And then the second part, we can start resonating that. So we have to become who we want to become, and then we have to communicate that we are that person. This is getting kind of loud, so I may have to refilm this, but I mean, well, you know, it's a one-taker, so I'll try it. If you think of yourself as a piece of art or a song, right, you could spend your entire life building a beautiful piece of art, a song, your masterpiece, your magnum opus. But if no one sees it, no one hears it, no one experiences it, then you can't necessarily draw a community around people who like it, right? No one will know, right? So as we're building ourselves, it's not one and then the other. As we're building ourselves, we also have to resonate, even subtly, and express who we actually are. We can do this in many ways, honestly, in every way that we do things in life. The things we say, the things we do, the people we associate with, the projects we pursue, the job we take, the people we marry, the people we hang out with. These are all expressions of ourselves. And they're very important because as we change who we are, our actions might also change too. But let's say that you decide that volunteering is very core and essential to your soul, and volunteering especially for animals, right? Or like, let's say you really care about animals. You might express that through volunteer work. You might work at a shelter, or you might, if you want to really double down and say, this isn't a side hustle, this is my hustle, it's my main hustle. You might become an animal doctor, or you might become a vet tech, right? Depending on how deep you want to go into that and how complex you want your job to be. There are different ways you can pursue that, right? And you express that. So you first realize who you are, then you try to express who you are. And then you can talk with people that are similarly minded. You'll meet a lot of people in that journey. You'll meet a lot of people in medical school. You'll meet a lot of people in school and in class that are going on the same path. And this is how you can align yourself with like-minded people. And yes, it does help if you are a little bit more sociable. I think it does. I was thinking about this because a common pushback for some of the things I've discussed is like, well, what if you're an introvert? What if you don't want to talk with people? And I have an idea that I'll give at the end for that. But the metaphor I give for this, first developing yourself and then sounding out, this one's important because I feel like it adds a layer of complexity that we don't initially realize. Like, oh, well, I'll just improve myself and then find like-minded people, be exposed to like-minded people, and let's, like, to use marketing terms, let's say 1,000 people view your product, only 1% buy, so that's 10 people buying. So if you're exposed to 1,000 people and 1% become your friends, then you have 10 friends, right? It's a very utilitarian, almost too much so way of looking at making friends, but it still operates like that. You have a friendship conversion rate, even if you're not trying for one. So the idea of exposing yourself to more like-minded people while making yourself more likable and more true by your own terms, then you can make more friends and people and meet more people that are like-minded. And this metaphor that I want to talk about is because not everyone has a desire to be as creative as some other people. And I don't mean that as a bad thing. There's some people, like, for some people, they see acting on the TV, like me. I see acting on the TV, and I'm like, okay, cool. That's a good movie. And I just put it out of my mind, I'm like, dang. And if it's a really good, I'll talk about it with my wife, I'll talk about it with friends, I'll recommend it. Like, man, that was a really good movie. You should watch it. I really enjoyed it. But for some people, it's not enough. They want to live the characters, right? They want to act it out. They have to be like, man, that was a beautiful monologue. I'm going to memorize it. And then like this eye movement the actor does, and then the actress responds in a certain way without speaking. It's amazing. And that level of creativity is really good if you want to go into theater. But not everyone has that. But let's say that you do a painting, or you compose a song, or you write a poem, or a novel, or a story. Let's use the example of a story, because I'm writing a story right now called Traveling Merchant Chronicles, which is the shirt that you see me wear sometimes. We have this story. Let's say you create the story. Let's say you give yourself a day to create the story. This is a simple one. It's like, let's say it's like an adventure. It's a fantasy. It follows the hero's journey. And then you create it, and you put it out there, and people start reading it. Eventually, you'll find some people who are supportive, but eventually you'll find some people who push back a little bit. You're like, I don't like that this character just changed their mind like halfway through the story. Like it really wasn't enough development time, and he started off simple, and then he decided that he wanted to do good things immediately, even though he was shown to be perhaps a little bit more cowardly, a little bit more timid early on, and there really wasn't really a catalyst. He just suddenly decided to pick up a sword and fight the bad guy, right? And you're like, huh. Now, depending on how you view it, and I promise this metaphor might make sense. You might think that makes sense, or you think it doesn't make sense, right? But eventually, even if that doesn't make sense, you'll eventually find some kind of criticism or some kind of pushback where you think, that is a good point. Why don't I make that, right? And you're like, okay, well, I'll adjust my story. And then there's going to be things where you're like, the bad guy he's too, you make him too relatable, right? Like he's too good, and I can't hate him enough, right? I can't dislike the bad guy enough, and I don't like it. And you're like, no, actually, I want to show like the dichotomy of good and evil, and how there's a little bit more of a spectrum there than people realize. You might think that, right? And that nature of how we think of things is how we develop ourselves so we can resonate with other people. Because you'll know that if you spend only a day or two writing your story, crafting your art, composing your music, the type of people you're going to attract is going to be a little bit different than what you actually want. Because by your own metrics, you think, that story could be improved. I could do this instead. That does make more sense. Why don't I do that? Now, Some people don't think so. Some people might like a hero that changed their mind very quickly. And if you do, you're going to attract that kind of person, which is cool. Okay, but it might be a little bit different than your true self. It might be a little bit different than you intend. And this is how I think of the process of improving ourselves and attracting other people. Once again, whether platonic or romantic or anything is there anything in between? Yeah, anything in between. Business is usually the one I put in there. Is we are not immediately perfect, and it takes some discovery to craft who we are. It takes a lot of time. Like, it takes a lot of time for you to write the story. But very importantly, like I mentioned, for the introverts out there, people who don't want to talk with people, think about it this way. And I learned this myself as I was developing the story. I'm going to take a sip of tea. That as we make our story, as we go through life on this journey, we are not going, you're going to learn pretty early on that you can't please everyone, right? I agree with that. There's not, when you're exposed to enough people, it's pretty darn hard, possibly impossible, to make everyone like you, to have everyone like you equally, and no one has an issue with you. There's always going to be preferences, right? And that's not necessarily bad, but it's just how it is. Some people are going to prefer different things, right? So I might write a story that I think is really good, and I spend 10,000 hours on, right? And like I work with friends, I read different stories, I put into my story, like, man, it's like it has the metaphors of life. There's good and evil. There's like redemption, optimism, the human desire to keep growing and moving forward. All the things I really like, and it inspires people to read it, and inspires people while they're reading it, and there's humor. All the things I like, I'm like, great, this is a great story. And some people still might dislike it. But that is, not to be cliche, is okay, because I have created something that is so true to myself, right? The people that it attracts, the people who like it too, are going to be so specific to that I'm okay with what I have. Because think about it this way, right? You remember the example I gave of 1,000 views and like 1% conversion, 10% sales, right? And it's usually more like 2 or 3% depending on the platform if you want to go into it. Even less so than sales, because sales, like if you're doing it for a living, you need sales to keep going at a minimum in order to make a living and pay your people and pay yourself and sustain your life and pay your bills. But friends, how many good friends do we need? Like what I talked about, having the true essence where people they really recognize who and what you are and appreciate the things you do. How many of those people do we need? Or for many of us, for our loved ones, as we're talking about boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, partner, life partner, we really need one for a lot of people, right? We just need one. We need one good person. And how many good friends do we need? Well, our spouse counts as one, so we already have as one, right? So I think a good idea is to have your spouse as your best friend, right? But also, how many good friends do you have? So you only have one, but having 2 or 3, right? Just a few, right? That conversion rate, when they're pure and they're really aligned with you and they have your best interest at heart and they care about you and they love you and you love them, you only need a few, right? So once again, if you're an introvert, you're like, man, I won't be able to be exposed to as many people. I won't talk with as many people. I won't resonate with as many people. It does help to resonate a little bit, right? It's just like, once again, best song in the world, nobody hears it. How will anyone know it's the best song? But if we do that a little bit, not too much out of my comfort zone, because you're gonna find other introverts too. You're definitely not alone in that. Do a little bit, and we attract like-minded people. You don't need to have that many people to convert, right? 1, 2, 3 people that are close. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people have said this before. They're worth like 30 ho-hum friends, right? Not that we should value our friends necessarily, but when we have close friends and a partner and people to go through life with, that in itself can be a tremendous blessing. And if we work on ourselves, like we're a painting, like we're a song, like we're a poem, and then we share it continually with others through expressing ourselves. Once again, if you like animals, you can pursue medical school for animals, vet tech, things like that. Volunteering at the shelter, depending on how you want to do it. You can meet like-minded people, and then you only need a few as you continue to sculpt and grow yourself and pursue those things to really make a huge impact in your life. I hope this video can help. I hope you can hear me. I'm guessing you couldn't fully hear me. I might leave this as like a bonus just for some people to listen to before I re-record it, but I really hope this can help. Thank you so much for watching. Have a beautiful day, my friend.